Early on the morning of July 20th, 1944, a Nazi staff car sped through a forest in East Prussia. Riding in it, a German army officer carrying a bomb. He was on his way to a personal meeting with the Führer himself, Adolf Hitler. The story of the extraordinary plot to kill Hitler at the height of World War II will be the first stop on our journey into the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected. As World War II became increasingly disastrous for Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler began to avoid his country's devastated cities. He spent more and more of his time in remote, isolated places like the secret military headquarters he called Wolf's Lair. A completely self-contained compound, Wolf's Lair was guarded by crack troops, but even they could not defend Hitler against a plot hatched by his own officers. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg was the plot's key man. Disillusioned by the failure of Hitler's war plans, he volunteered to carry a live bomb into a meeting with the Führer. Once at Wolf's Lair, von Stauffenberg asked for a private room and a few minutes to himself. He said he wanted to put on a fresh shirt before meeting his Führer. Von Stauffenberg had been a frontline fighting officer. His combat career had been ended by terrible wounds sustained in Rommel's North Africa campaign. He'd lost an eye, all of his right hand, and some of his left. To arm the bomb, von Stauffenberg had to break a small glass vial, but he had only these two fingers and his thumb. And he had to work quickly. If von Stauffenberg failed now, he might never get another chance. Finally, he managed to break the capsule. Acid inside the capsule now dripped onto a thin metal strip within the bomb. In about 10 minutes, the acid would eat through the strip, release the trigger, and detonate the blast that was to kill Hitler. The meeting was already well underway by the time von Stauffenberg joined it. The conference room was crowded with high-ranking officers. Hitler stood near the door by a wicker stool. Field Marshal Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, introduced the Führer to von Stauffenberg. The two men shook hands. Keitel suggested that von Stauffenberg begin his report immediately, but fortunately for von Stauffenberg, Hitler was deeply involved in a discussion about Russian advances in the East. He waved von Stauffenberg away, much to von Stauffenberg's great relief. In a few more minutes, he knew the bomb in his briefcase would detonate. Von Stauffenberg placed the bomb on the floor and whispered to Colonel Heinz Brandt here that he wanted to see if his telephone call had come through yet. Last-minute information for his report. Then he left the room. The meeting continued. Hitler and his officers poring over the map spread out on the table. Colonel Brandt, moving closer to Hitler, trying to get a better look at the map, found the briefcase in his way, so he gave it a nudge. Just enough to push it all the way under the table and completely behind the solid support. A short time later, the bomb went off. Von Stauffenberg had waited outside for the blast. When it came, when he saw smoke pouring from the building and then bodies being carried out, he rushed back to Berlin. There, he joined with the other German army officers arresting high-ranking Nazis. But von Stauffenberg was ignorant of one essential fact. The room was shattered.
Many officers had been killed or wounded, but the oak supports on the table had shielded Hitler from the blast. Although his right arm was injured, Hitler was alive. As Nazi leaders gathered around him, he plotted his revenge. Von Stauffenberg was arrested and shot that night. A reign of terror was launched that involved over 5,000 Germans, most of them totally innocent. Some of the key plotters were taken to Berlin's Plötzensee prison and hung from meat hooks by piano wire. As they slowly strangled to death, their agony was filmed for Hitler's private viewing. Had von Stauffenberg's bomb done its job that July morning, had Hitler died then and there, the course of the war would have been abruptly altered. Today, the map of Europe, the history of the world would be quite different. And Hitler would have died then, but for the casual, half-unconscious gesture that nudged a briefcase a few inches further under an oak table. The entire course of history can turn on the smallest of details. Believe it or not. Forgery. A fascinating crime. Letters, supposedly from the hand of Cleopatra, written in French. Faked diplomatic correspondence used to start a war. More recently, Clifford Irving's fraudulent memoirs of the mysterious Howard Hughes and the diaries of Adolf Hitler. Complete fakes. But none of these forgeries, audacious and sensational as they were, begins to approach the sheer nerve of the scheme hatched by a teenage mastermind who dared the impossible. His incredible story will be the first stop on our journey into the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected. Not a very valuable autograph, I'm afraid. Certainly nothing like the rare signatures of the great and famous. Strangely, one of the world's rarest signatures belongs to one of the world's most prolific writers. Only 5 actual Shakespeare signatures have ever been found. For centuries, the search for more has led hopeful collectors to a town called Stratford-upon-Avon. Shakespeare was born here, raised here, and returned here to live when he retired from the theater. He lies buried in a local church. This is the very house in which Shakespeare was born. In 1794, about 180 years after Shakespeare's death, a London book dealer named Samuel Ireland came here, along with his 17-year-old son, William, for a very special reason. They were determined to find some scrap of paper, anything bearing Shakespeare's signature. The result of their search, utter failure. Samuel Ireland was heartbroken, but William, a dutiful and loving son, decided to restore his father's spirits. Back in London, the young William Ireland took some ink, diluted it with acid to make it look antique on the page, forged an old deed, and proceeded to age it down. Then, he signed it. William Shakespeare, copying the signature from one of the published facsimiles. He presented it to his father as a genuine Shakespeare document, a sensational find. His father was ecstatic, despite William's unlikely story of having been given the deed by an old aristocrat with a huge trunk full of such papers. The father wanted to believe. In short order, William produced more documents.
some legal papers, then some letters, then parts of Hamlet, and then all of King Lear. Literary experts were fascinated, to say the least. When they realized all this had been brought to light in less than 6 months, they concluded the papers had to be genuine. No one, particularly a mere lad, could possibly have forged so much so quickly. At least one scholar fell to his knees before the papers and kissed them. Sacred relics from the hand of the greatest author in the English language. But then, the 18-year-old William Ireland overreached himself. He forged the complete manuscript of a play by Shakespeare that no one had ever heard of before, an entirely new work called Vortigern. The Drury Lane Theatre, London, agreed to produce the play and engaged the renowned Charles Kemble to play the lead. But in the meantime, some of the literary experts had begun to doubt the authenticity of Ireland's reputed Shakespeare discoveries. It looked as though everything was going to come to a head with the first public performance of Vortigern. Opening night is always a harrowing experience. In the 18th century, it could be downright dangerous. If the audience disliked the play, they were quite likely to riot. People were sometimes killed. The theater was truly exciting in those days. Supporters and opponents of the new play turned out in huge numbers for its opening, jamming every square inch of the Drury Lane. Kemble, the leading actor, found himself in a dangerous dilemma. Should he try to carry the play or turn on it and let the audience know that he too suspected fraud? The moment of decision came when he stepped forward and delivered this line. And when this solemn mockery is ended, well, the crowd roared with laughter. When it subsided, Kemble repeated the line. And when this solemn mockery is ended. And that was the end of the evening and of Vortigern. Fortunately, the crowd was in a cheerful mood. The Ireland's father and son escaped unharmed. But the game was up. William confessed all. He, not Shakespeare, had created Vortigern. He alone was responsible for all the forgeries. And he soon made a fascinating discovery. People were actually seeking out and collecting his forgeries. So he began forging copies of his forgeries and selling them. To this day, they are bought and sold and kept in no less august an institution than the British Museum itself. And here, in Shakespeare's very birthplace, hangs a portrait of William Henry Ireland, the Shakespeare forger. Oh, there's one final footnote. Experts believe there really is out there somewhere, locked in an old trunk or hidden in a dusty attic, an authentic missing Shakespeare play. Believe it? Or not.